Police abuse remains one of the most serious and divisive human rights violations in the United States today. The horrific images of Rodney King being beat by the LAPD is one of the most blatant reminders of police brutality against innocent victims. The excessive use of force by police officers, including unjustified shootings, severe beatings, and fatal chokings, persist because overwhelming barriers to accountability make it possible for officers who commit human rights violations to escape due punishment and often to repeat their offenses. Police and public officials greet each new report of brutality with denials or explain that the act was just an aberration, while the administrative and criminal systems that should deter these abuses by holding officers accountable instead virtually guarantee them impunity. The special insider-exclusive investigation discovered that police brutality is persistent and rampant across America, and that systems to deal with abuse have failed, and that victims seeking redress face daunting obstacles at every point in the process, ranging from overt intimidation to the reluctance of local and federal prosecutors to take on brutality cases of officers who have committed these human rights violations. Despite claims to the contrary from city officials where abuses have become scandals in the media, efforts to make meaningful reforms have fallen short. The barriers to accountability are remarkably similar from city to city. Shortcomings in recruitment, training, and management are common to all. So is the fact that officers who repeatedly commit human rights violations tend to be a small minority who taint entire police departments but are protected routinely by the silence of their fellow officers and by flawed systems of reporting, oversight, and accountability. Today, the Insider Exclusive TV series examines this epidemic in this exclusive special, Police Brutality, the Torry Smith Story, and how famed Oakland-based civil rights lawyers John Burris, founder and partner of the law offices of John Burris, and his associate, Ben Nissenbaum, got justice for Torry with a record-breaking verdict of $6.25 million against the Oakland Police Department. We will see how John and Ben proved this case by exposing the lies and the contradictions of the various Oakland police officers. As John has often said, the problem of police brutality is much more widespread than most Americans are willing to admit. Our nation practices a selective blindness. In this great and strong nation, we have all become unwitting accomplices to the continuation of this conflict. John and Ben have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best civil rights trial lawyers in Oakland, in California, and in the nation. They have seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims of police brutality. They understand that police brutality is one of the most serious, the most enduring, and the most divisive human rights violations in the United States. The problem is not just in Oakland, but nationwide, and its nature is institutionalized. And because of that, they are driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. They learned a long time ago that if a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Their goal is not only to get justice for their clients, but to make sure that all Americans have the right to a fair trial, honest cops, impartial prosecutors, and fair judges with no agendas. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful, and that whatever is powerful may be just. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Oakland, California at the law offices of John Burris. It is my great pleasure to introduce John Burris to the show. Welcome to the show, John.
Good to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about your firm and what type of law you usually practice.
Well, my firm is a civil rights plaintiff law firm. What we do is primarily police misconduct cases as well as discrimination cases, some personal injury, but what we're really looking for victims people who have been victimized either by the police or by a corporation or by city government and their employment, and really trying to bring some sense of justice to them. The courts is a great avenue to give them an opportunity to be heard. Otherwise, it's our feeling that without this type of practice, many people would not have an opportunity to have their case heard in a fair and impartial way.
You've been in the news many times. You've represented some celebrities as well as the everyday, average, common person, haven't you?
I have, and I will say this. It's easy to represent celebrities. I mean,
Yeah.
I've represented a lot of outstanding, well-known people, but the most important work is representing the people with no names, because they're the ones who don't have access to the system in a fair way. Rich people, everyone wants to represent them, and that's easy. But the ordinary people are the ones, and more importantly, the African-American young men who have criminal records, because no one wants to represent them. They are the ultimate despised component of the whole judicial system. So I sort of take it upon my responsibility to bring whatever justice I can to them.
Yeah, when you say you take it upon your responsibility, there are many areas of laws you could practice. You could represent corporations, but you choose, like you said, to represent people who are disadvantaged from the get-go. Why is that?
Well, it's a philosophical notion that comes from my childhood. I grew up observing the civil rights movement in full form with Martin Luther King and all the various people who sacrificed a lot, and to some extent my family, seeing how my family struggle, seeing other people struggle, having a sense of fairness or not seeing real fairness by people. And so to me, it's became sort of my mantra of understanding the plight of people. And I also have a real deep sense of history. Social change only comes about when somebody asks for the question. Someone makes that effort to do it. If you don't do that, then nothing changes. And so if you look at some of the great people in history, they're all people who asked for change, who demanded change, who worked for change. In my own small way, I see that as happening in what I'm doing. And so from that sense, I see myself as just part of the ongoing struggle that people have had in this country to bring about social change. It's just my time to do it, and so I'm doing it.
Yeah, we are going to discuss today the case of Torry Smith. You got a great verdict on this case, and we're going to bring on right now the trial lawyers that handle that case, Ben Nissenbaum
and Adante Pointer.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Ben Nissenbaum and Adante Pointer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
You were the trial lawyers in this case.
We were.
And tell us a little bit about who is Torry Smith to begin with, your client.
Well, at the time that this incident happened, Torry was 24 years old. He'd been out of juvenile custody for a period of about 2.5 years. He was on parole for a juvenile conviction that he had. Really, he'd been 100% clean on parole,
right?
And that continues to this day. He's a working man, even after the verdict. He still is a working man.
And this happened in 2004.
Yeah,
right? So 7 years ago.
Right, September 10th, 2004 was actually the day that his life was really just almost turned to shambles.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And what happened? Give us the facts.
Well, what happened was Mr. Smith actually was in bed with his girlfriend, who he lived with at the time, down on Holly Street in Oakland. He was waiting for his parole officer to come to his house and search his home, which happened every single month. They would make an appointment, and he was expecting his parole agent to come on this morning. And he was waiting, basically just lounging in bed with his girlfriend, when there was a knock on the front door. His girlfriend, Patricia Gray, who lived with him, she got up to go answer the door, and in the meantime, several police officers came through the back door, which actually went right into the bedroom. The door itself to the back door was open, but the security door was closed.
When they came in with guns, right?
Yeah, they came in with guns. They came in very aggressively in uniform, and essentially came in just demanding to know information. And what it all came down to was these officers earlier in the day had found Torry's bank card in the car of a known drug dealer.
Yeah, Marcus Belton, I think his name was. Yeah,
that's his name.
Yeah,
it was actually his girlfriend's car, Juanita Walton's car, and she had actually bought that car at auction sometime before. And the whole way that Torry got kind of connected to them is that, well, at the time he was working, of course, he worked at an auto parts store, Pep Boys, I believe. And also on the side, he would buy and sell cars at auction.
Yeah.
And it's a common way that people will make a bit of change here and there. And so he had bought and sold this blue Mercury Cougar, and realized he had lost his wallet shortly after that. And this is about a month before these officers came into his life.
Yeah.
And so he actually told his parole agent about it. He needed to get a copy of his ID. So we had that documented. But that's how they connected him to this so-called gangster.
Right. So rather than properly investigate it, you find something, maybe, I'm sure they found out he was on parole. Calling up his parole officer and maybe, doing a quick investigation, they decided to storm the house.
Well, you would think that they would have called the parole officer,
Yeah.
but they didn't. They ran the name, found out he was on parole, and this is Officers Parkinson and Midyett who did this. They ran the name, found out he was on parole, and essentially decided immediately then that he was a gangster.
Yeah.
And they just didn't know. And if they called the parole agent, they would have found out otherwise.
Now they come into the house, then what happens?
Well, they come into the house and they start demanding information. First they tell him, we know you're with Marcus Belton. We know, you're involved in guns. Give us information about guns, murders, drug crimes. And those weren't their exact words. There's a lot of cursing, but basically it's an attempt to extort information from him. And it turns out that this was a technique that these officers had practiced throughout the years.
Right.
And it's what they do. And they were especially assigned to do this, to shake parolees down for information. And
scare them, threaten them.
Right. Exactly.
They took him into custody.
Well, they took him into custody, and he didn't even know why. They told him at the scene, at his house, that he had a warrant for his arrest, and he didn't.
That was a lie.
And he was like, what? A warrant? Exactly. And they just didn't know. He's talking about my parole agent's coming. And so the parole agent actually shows up probably about 15 minutes after he gets taken away. And this was a regular scheduled monthly meeting with his parole agent. Now, bear in mind, Torry was 100% clean. He took urine tests, every urine test, 100% clean. Some of those were scheduled, some of them were random. This is a person, he was never violated while on parole. And he kept a job, and he did very well on parole. And the officers just...
They made a bunch of false assumptions, essentially. They thought that they could take advantage of Torry because of his status, a status that many people within that community of East Oakland have, meaning they've had brushes with the criminal justice system, they have records, they're on parole or probation. And so these officers, they're pretty much, a person such as Torry is vulnerable to the officers. And the officers sought to take advantage of his status, hoping to shake him down to get information. Mm-hmm. But these were all inaccurate assumptions because, as Mr. Nissenbaum just said, Torry had actually been performing very well on parole. Yeah. So they made a miscalculation, and ultimately it cost Torry, but it ultimately cost them.
Yeah. Now he's arrested. He's detained. How do you guys get brought in on the case?
Well, there's a lot that happens before we come into the case. And interestingly, while he's on parole and he gets arrested, there's a parole hold, so he can't be released from custody. But interestingly, he faces 2 preliminary hearings. Yeah. And the officer testifies that he sees Torry, testifies falsely, that he sees Torry in the backyard of his home carrying a Tommy gun, of all things.
Right. And this coincides with, I'm going to ask you the question, what was your legal strategy here? And I think your legal strategy would basically to prove that the cops were lying, right? And setting him up. So what were some of those lies?
Well, the biggest lie was that Torry had possessed any kind of gun.
Yes. So you have a police officer who is testifying under oath, claiming that the person he arrested has a machine gun.
Yes.
Which is an absolute lie. And how do you prove that was a lie?
Through several ways. We had direct evidence, which is Torry's father was at home. He lived in the adjoining duplex.
So you had a witness saying that.
We had a witness who saw officers enter the residence. Torry was not outside in the backyard. The screen door, and so in terms of the strategy of how we figured out how to prove it, one way of proving it is that the screen door into the bedroom When it opens, it slams up against the side of the house. It's just a very poor design, and it makes a loud noise. And so Torry's father was at home. He hears the sound of the screen door open and slam against the side of the house and sees 2 police officers entering his son's bedroom. Now, the officers claim that Torry came outside. That would have been one opening of the screen door. And then one officer, he claims by himself, had Torry walk back into the room, back into the home in front of him,
right,
without even handcuffing him, which didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
This was a very key point.
So he had 12 different stories going on.
Oh, exactly.
Each one contradicted each other.
Multiple stories, as well as the fact that, you know, what we were able to do through our investigation through our office was that we were able to determine that there weren't fingerprints, or at least Torry's, on the gun.
By the way, one of the reasons they want to get him on this gun charge, because he is a felon.
Right.
So a felon in possession of a gun, I think, is a mandatory, 5 years or something?
It could be even more. I mean, you figure there could be a gun enhancement to it. It was an unknown amount of time that he faced, but he's looking at a decade likely in custody.
Tell us about the verdict.
The verdict was
it's huge.
It was huge. It was huge.
It was 6.4 million or something like that?
6.05.
Yeah.
6.05. The jury's first question in deliberations was, how do we measure damages?
Yeah.
And it was clear, even throughout the officer's testimony, that, I mean, they were lying in a very bad way.
And it also included punitive damages, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
$100,000 in punitive, which is kind of unusual.
Per officer.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it was reduced, wasn't it? The judge reduced it or something?
Not the punitives.
Yeah.
The punitives stayed the same.
So are those officers responsible for that $100,000?
theoretically, they are.
But what happens? The police department pays it?
Right. Well, the city stepped in
Yeah.
and took care of that.
And it was eventually
Of
reduced
course.
down to $4 million, right?
Yeah, it's a $4.25 million.
Still, it's huge, huge.
Definitely.
Great job. And I'm glad, America's going to be watching this. And if anybody else in a similar situation, I hope they contact you, because that was a tough case. And you got a great verdict. And congratulations, and thank you very much for being on the program. Great verdict. Your lawyers did a great job. Let's talk about police brutality on the whole. It's a serious problem, isn't it?
Police brutality is a major problem in this country, and it's not one that most people want to talk about. It's sort of under the radar. It only affects poor people, basically, African Americans and generally, and no one really wants to talk about that. It's like the crazy aunt one has somewhere and no one talks about that. It's hidden in the closet. But here, so in Alameda County, in Oakland, in Los Angeles, in Detroit, in Chicago, New York.
Major cities.
Major cities. It does happen as well in smaller cities that are beyond beyond the major markets, because I have a lot of cases in these little slow market areas. It does happen. There's less sophistication in those places, and so they kind of get away with it. There's no control over them. But for me, police misconduct is a major issue throughout this country. I've looked at a lot of studies. I've done a lot of reading about it in different countries. I've seen the various reports. I've been involved in a consent decree here in Oakland. I've read about the consent decrees around the country. All of those areas indicate that there's a real issue of disparate treatment of police misconduct in this country. And so I'm at the forefront of looking at those issues, and I care deeply about them.
And thank God. Do police discriminate against minorities and other groups?
There's a lot of evidence that suggests to support that. And most of the racial profiling type cases that have come about, that is, that people are being stopped because of their race without probable cause, there's a lot of evidence to support that. We have that here in Oakland pretty clearly. Mm-hmm. The Highway Patrol did it. We had a study here. We all know about the studies that took place on Interstate 5 on the East Coast, in New Jersey, and Maryland, all the way in Florida, and Chicago, and Illinois. So we know that that kind of discriminatory practice is occurring. Basically, the U.S. government and the Justice Department looks at these cases to see whether or not that there's policing is taking place as a consequence of racial discrimination. New Orleans is a classic example of outrageous police misconduct. Yes. But we have found, in the cases I've looked at, 85% of the cases we have are against African Americans. Now, we do have cross-sections of other ethnic groups, but basically African American, and primarily against young African American males. Yeah. And if you have a criminal record of any kind, you've been on probation or any kind, you are just fair game, and there's very little that can be done about it.
There are police commissions that are set up after cases like Rodney King, after Oscar Grant. Do they do any good?
I think it's mixed results. We've been involved in the writers' case where we've had an independent monitor. We've had a federal judge overseeing it. We've been in this case for 8 years. I had a case that I took place early in my career where a young boy was shot and killed that caused the Citizen Review Board in Oakland to be established. That thing has been a political football for almost 25 years now. Same thing in Berkeley, although Berkeley probably works a little bit better. San Francisco has one that works pretty good as well. So they can function. I think, here's what I think. The most important thing for a citizen, a person who's been injured by the police, is the right to be heard. To go to a situation where they're going to be fairly heard and someone's going to listen to their view. And frequently they will appreciate the police officer's conduct if they get to be heard. The problem is you have these, when police have to police themselves through internal affairs, they always rule for the police. It's always done in secret. So as a consequence, the community doesn't develop confidence in them. And they shouldn't, because internal affairs often is just a rubber stamp for the police department. So the police commission was a way to get outside of that, to allow people to have some way to be heard. Unfortunately, these police things have become political footballs. Because the person who appoints them generally is a city councilman. That person appoints someone that's close to their political philosophy. So therefore you get these political decisions as opposed to a true hearing for the citizens. And that's a real problem.
Yeah. Well, John, I want to thank you very much for being on the program. It's because of your dedication to make these changes to our society to protect the everyday, average, ordinary person that changes are made. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.